The Rebbe's Farbrangens were very unique. Now we don't find by any other Rebbe the signon, the style of Farbrangens the way we saw by the Rebbe. The other Rebbeim, their main way of communicating with the Chassidim, their Torah, was through writing it down. For sure, starting from the Mittler Rebbe until the Frierdiker Rebbe, the way they communicated their Chassidus was through writing their Chassidus down. The Rebbe communicated his Chassidus to the Chassidim and his Torah to the Chassidim, and the things that the Rebbe wanted to impart to the world and to the Chassidim was through a Farbrengen. Without a doubt, the Rebbe spent many more hours in Farbrengen, more than all the Rebbeim together. The Rebbe, throughout the years, increased the amount of Farbrengens, and when the Rebbe wanted to tell something to the Chassidim and to the world, the Rebbe did it through a Farbrengen. And when a Chassid wants to really understand the Rebbe's mahalach, the way the Rebbe thinks, and the different things that Rebbe gave us as Chassidim into the world throughout the Nesias, one has to go through the Farbrengens of the Rebbe. Now, although we have Lukot Sichos, and we have the different ways of the Rebbe's Torah being written down, but in a certain sense, Ein Edema, Shmuel, when you see or when you're learning Farbrengen, you're reading it, you're learning it the way the Rebbe said it, and in the style that the Rebbe said it, and it puts you into the world of the Rebbe. And therefore, it's a very special opportunity we have now to, in a Seder Mesuder, to go through various Farbrengens and to learn them, and to, from beginning to end, to start getting a little bit to appreciate the flavor around how the Rebbe gave us throughout the years different inyanim.
I was a bacha, vaguely knew about Lubavitcher Hasidim as people who worked on being Makar of Yidden. This I'm talking about in the early Yuds. I was just a young teenager. I was and the first time I learned Tanya, I was 15 years old in Camp Aguda. And the first Farbrengen I went to was Simchas Beis HaShoeva Tovshin Tez Zayin. I remember it like it's today. That year, I went to 7 Farbrengens. Simchas Beis HaShoeva was in 770 in the Shalash, where the first section of the shul is. There was like a garage originally, and that became like a hall, or it was covered with tarpaulin in the summer, and with chach in Sukkot. During the winter, it was freezing cold. It was outdoors basically. So any Farbrengens during the winter, like Yuds Kislev, Yud Shvat, and Purim, took place in a hall. A rented hall. There was one on Nostrand and Eastern Parkway called the Gayhart Ballroom. I was there a few times. Lincoln Terrace. There were different places, about 4 or 5 different halls, all within a half a mile of 770, probably a mile. The Shabbos Farbrengen, the summer Farbrengens, big ones. I mean, like that means Yud Beis Tammuz and Chofav were in the Shalosh. They were in that courtyard outside, which was open, maybe covered with tarpaulin, and had some like lights there. And similarly, I was at the Farbrengens there. Pesach, Vuos, and Yud Beis Tammuz, Tovshin Tez Zayin. Those I was at 7 Farbrengens, Yuds Kislev. Simchas Beis HaShoeva was in the hall, was in the 770. Yuds Kislev and Yud Shvat and Purim were in the hall. Achron Shal Pesach, I walked to 770 for the Farbrengen, and similarly the second day Shavuos, and that was in the Shalash. And then the 7th one was Yud Beis Tammuz, the day before Camp Grand Yisrael unofficially by the Rebbe Zero began. Now, that was that year, and the following year, Yud Zayin, I walked very often. There were a lot of Farbrangens, of those years. Normally, in the earlier years, there was just Farbrangens on Shabbos, Shabbos and Borchen. Shabbos was Chodesh was Lav Davke. Shabbos Yud Kislev was Lav Davke. But in Yud Zayin, there were many, even to the extent that Shushan Purim Cotton, there was also a Farbrengen in Tovshin Yud Zayin. Many, many Farbrengens, according to those times. Now, even by so that the intimacy, the sense of intimacy with the Rebbe was there even in the weekday Farbrengens. By the way, the Rebbe's mother came to the weekday Farbrengens, and they had a chair for there was no mechitza, there was just women like the next room or like in the back of the hall, sort of like it was a hall. There must have been a few hundred people, maybe probably less than 1,000. I was a kid. I was listening, but there in the back, in the front of the women, was the Rebbe Tzachana, the Rebbe's mother, and as you can hear on many of the tapes, the Rebbe would speak intimate things. The Shabbos Dike Farbrengens were something else because they were held upstairs in the Zal. Now in the nuns, a regular normal mincha, you couldn't fit in there. There was more people outside than inside that room. Imagine if Farbrengens there. They had narrower tables downstairs, or that normal time, and they set up the Farbrengen like about 3 or 4 rows, and slightly elevated. You see a lot of the pictures and videos of the Rebbe there at the back of the thing where the Swarm Shafa is. There was like a window, and the women would be in the Cheder Sheni, and they would be able to hear. Now, I remember walking from Williamsburg in Tovshin Yud Zayin, the winter. With Tes Zayin, I walked, but it was only for Pesach and Shavuos. Here, it was winter time, freezing cold, 20 degrees outside. And I remember walking from the street into 770. As soon as I entered into 770, my glasses became fogged up. And then I would sort of get my coat, put it somewhere, and orientate myself a little while. And then I'd walk into where the Farbrengen was, the glasses fogged up all over again. It was so squeezed, so squashed. The light switches in 770 in the Zal upstairs near the Omid, they were covered like they are now with a tin thing. So because just the very pressure of people, and you'd fight like to get a good place. There's no such thing as a not good place over there in terms of the way it was in later years, when you could fly away. And the Rebbe, it was intimate on a certain level. It was a much smaller crowd from a much more limited constituency, a limited group of people, mostly the Russian Hasidim and some Polish Hasidim and the Tzugekumene. It was a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful community. I want to end with one very, very special such occurrence. I was in Torah Vidas, learning already Tanya, Tes Zayin, and as I said, Yud Zayin, very, very involved. I was known in Torah Vidas by Rabbi Avram Shaya Shapiro, my Rosh Yeshiva. He was the Talmud Muvak of Reb Shimon Shkop. He knew me as a Lubavitcher. When he said Makish Yitzir LaHavaya, he looked at me and said, Havaya, you see, I used the word Havaya. I'm not becoming a Lubavitcher. And I had Yechidus that year, the first time. And the Rebbe said, obviously, this year you'll finish in Torah Vidas. So I went to Tomchet Mimim. I wrote to the Rebbe in Elul, Tovshin Yud Zayin. Chav Gimel Elul, I wrote in, and Chav Hey Elul, I picked up my answer, telling me to go to Newark or Montreal, and eventually, with that story in itself, I was going to Montreal after Simchas Torah Yudches. And I went up to the Rebbe's left. I went up to the Rebbe at the Farbrangens, as I said, the Farbrangens Far HaKofis. Before Kofis, there was a Farbrangen for a few hours. And I went up to the Rebbe and I said these words: Ich will beten a bracha, ich soll haben Hatzlacha in Tomchei Tmimim. I want to ask for a bracha that I should have Hatzlacha in Tomchei Tmimim. And the Rebbe said, Amen, Amen. Only time that I heard from the Rebbe that a double Amen on the bracha and L'chaim. And as I was withdrawing, he didn't turn your back to the Rebbe, obviously. So I was walking backwards from the Rebbe. He called after me. I was maybe still within Dalaramis. And the Rebbe said back to me, "Darfst du etwas euch tun dazu?" You have to do something about that also. And from this, I just, in my life, and I'm telling you, sharing it with you because every one of you, every bacha, the tired, beautiful Mukusharim Digabachim today, every one of you has that power. Amen. Amen, the Rebbe said. Give you a double bracha that you should have atzlacha. And then the Rebbe is saying it's not an afterthought. The Rebbe is saying that's because you're getting the bracha brings it into a reality, but in order to be effective, you have to be a keli. You have to prepare the ground. So the Rebbe said you also have to do something, but you doing something together with the connection with the Rebbe, who's you can feel it, you can see it, and the Eibusher will help that we should all use the koiches, be kalim to the koiches, and bring Mashiach very soon.